Hi everyone. I think I know quite a few people here. We've definitely got a lot of Immersive Labs people here representing in this corner. So a little bit about myself. I'm Jaycee. I work at Immersive Labs, one of the sponsors for tonight. I have done 4 roles. I've done 4 jobs in 24 months. The company also grew from 10 people to 120 people in the past 24 months. So despite the fact I had different roles throughout the company, the only constants I had was joining and building a high-performing team. It became a new normal. So I have done quite a few things. So I joined as a software engineer. I then worked a little bit in the tech leading role, and then went into engineering management, and now gone back being a software engineer. So I've done a loop. And I realized that team health actually takes contribution from all. It takes contribution from yourself and your managers and your organization. And apparently, high-performing team is something that everyone wants. Since 1994, there's a huge increase of research on trust, especially in the organization, and how it affects team performance. And I found that there was a lot of resource for team leads and managers around cultivating trust in teams, not so much for individual contributors. So this talk is going to be kind of talking about interpersonal trust, which often cannot be influenced, or not often as influenced by external support, like your team lead and your managers. So this talk is for my fellow in IC. I will include some tips for leads and managers as we go along. So what is trust? Before we kind of go into the dictionary definition, in the neuroscience world, there are a lot of research that says that your oxytocin level in your brain when you reach a sort of trustworthy relationship with someone. So in a nerdy term, your oxytocin goes way up when you are interacting with someone that you trust. That often is spoken about like oxytocin for when people fall in love, but that's the basis of a trusting relationship. So, and Oxford Dictionary says that, there's something really wordy, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to use this definition. And I've been following a lot of work from Brené Brown, and she did a lot of work around social work and like these sort of leadership and team health. And she has this anatomy of trust, which again is quite in depth. I won't go through it today, but it's worth looking up. She's got a lot of blog posts and resources online that you can go into. But I'm just going to go on something relatively simple. Trust, as a definition, is that the moment I know I can lean on you. And why it matters. So head of industry at Google they have done the research on Project Aristroph about a high-performing team needs psychological safety. It's a little bit different than trust, but we'll get to that. So I'm going to be quoting this study a lot by Ebenson back in 2004. A team needs high psychological safety in order to facilitate collaboration work, especially when they faces uncertainty, a lot of change, and need to learn together. Hands up, does that sound like the kind of work that you do on a day-to-day basis? Yeah. I think a lot of people work in like startups and scale up at the moment in Bristol. The reason why we need to kind of cultivate psychological safety, it promotes a lot of these behavior that can contribute to a high output and quality output. It promotes innovative behavior and information. Encourage team members to engage in boundary spanning. That's more around, in the technical world, you normally hear it called cross-functional. And trust and respect in the horizontal group, your peer relationship, promotes team psychological safety. So this is the bit that I'll be going in depth into today. So in that study, what's quite nice about it is that it kind of have this really nice diagram, so I don't have to draw it out myself. I can just copy it. So I will be concentrating on the trust and respect, mostly on the trust part, how it sort of contributes to your team learning behaviors. So yeah, trust is a key component of elevating your team's psychological safety. I'm going to go into how do you build trust with your peer and your managers. So building trust with peers. This quote from Hemingway is quite nice. The best way to find out if you can trust someone is to trust them. Easy to say, hard to do, and I get that. And I think in a lot of leadership articles I've seen, it's this word, like this phrase, assuming positive intent. It's something that never really sit right with me. I kind of have to delve into it a bit more as well. It's not quite the same, because when you are assuming positive intent, it minimizes one's feeling, policing their reaction, and question their perception, especially if there's an incident that happened. And it undermines your code of conduct. Everyone has the right to feel safe and be safe at their workplace. And marginalized people feel less welcome and less safe in your community. And Tiffany is quite nicely linked that our talk today, that marginalized people will feel less welcome and less safe in your community if you're just being quite lazy with or around your code of conduct at work. Assuming positive intent is a very easy and lazy way to go. We assume the best of everyone, but it's just trying to enforce trust into the team, but it doesn't quite work that way. It needs to come from a genuine place. I think for me it was that, well, maybe it comes from the fact that the default position is, well, there's no reason to distrust you at this point when you have, especially when you are in the high-performing team, you're growing constantly, you're making a new relationship all the time. Maybe the best default position is go, there's no reason why I don't trust you right now. But what if there is? Potentially explore why that you have that gut feel. Is it rumor, assumption, and previous conflict that caused that? So you might want to think about debugging trust with this person. Use your curiosity to begin your research. I think reaching out, having regular one-to-one conversation is something that I don't often see. I think everyone, especially in a high-performing team, you tend to get your head down and get through the day looking at your computers and not having that one-to-one relationship. You may have a lot of team meetings, you may have a lot of team activities, but trust, the interpersonal trust, really down onto that one-to-one interaction. Gaining insight and perspective of your members, kind of beyond that, how was your weekend question? What are their values? What are their pains? What is their background? And I think the tips for leaders and managers is consider how you can facilitate that one-to-one conversation. I don't have any real good suggestions right now, but something to consider. And how to do that effectively. So you may need to gain and practice some skills in how to build a one-to-one relationship effectively. Active listening, it also then helps you build your authenticity, which improves your trustworthiness in the organization, which is kind of self-perpetuating cycle. You could use a framework. Nonviolent communication is the one that I tend to come across the most. The ethos is strengthening your ability to inspire compassion in yourself and others. So it's worth looking into. And tips for leaders and managers to provide training or coaching on these skills. Often that people don't really have a lot of practice in these skills or getting feedback on that. So this would be a really good opportunity to spend time with your team members on. And after you build that one-to-one relationship, there are things you can do to build even a long-term trust with your team member. So have anyone heard of sponsorship before? Yeah, not many people. So the idea of sponsorship, now being kind of widely used, is that support to a new idea form an authority. But in my opinion, authority not necessarily hierarchy. You don't really need to, I think there's more to it. And I want to kind of get into social capital. So everyone has social capital at work because it's a social group. And having a dynamic social capital within the team can help participants to achieve collaborative goals. And the idea is that you don't need to be a manager or someone in power to be someone's sponsor. Merely being a sponsor because you have social capital to spend is a good step towards building trust with your team member. So invest your social capital, like putting your name against an initiative from your team members. And if you at any point sort of hesitate, doing from that, it's time to explore, getting feedback getting feedback from your peers on the idea, which I will kind of get into in a little moment. And if you are looking for a sponsor, because you want someone to adopt your initiative, there is this ethos kind of stem from sort of Japanese culture. It's called nemawashi. If you are interested in this, Toyota wrote a really comprehensive guide, which it was really, really good read. The idea is going around the roots. You're taking care of transplanting from a sort of new plant. You spend the time to go around planning and building a consensus within your team. So getting feedback from each peer and continuously improving and refining your idea. And why would you want to spend the time on that? Study the support that the appreciation nature of the participant management ranks quite highly in the decision-making process within the organization. If you want your idea to get adopted, you want to get buy-in. And the easiest way to get buy-in is do it on the one-to-one interaction. Asking and giving feedback. So I'm kind of talking about beyond your code review in this. And why would you want to have peer feedback system in your workplace? It promotes critical thinking and higher order learning in the group. And I think the first step to do is actively asking for feedback. Automate it, schedule it, collate it. Make sure that you're on top of this. Be specific with your question when you're asking for feedback. I think one of the toughest things I find when we are trying to enforce a feedback culture in the company was that we weren't really specific with our question. So think about how you want to get out of that feedback. Is there anything that in your presentation or any content you generated that you want specific content, specific advice on? And start from there. So this framework kind of shows that you can have really vague negative feedback, vague positive feedback. And I think the sort of first step to take is looking into how to practice giving positive, specific feedback. Giving positive feedback is a lot easier than giving negative feedback, which I will get into in a moment later. But if you want to take a first step in giving feedback to one, positive is often the best way to start. Consider a feedback framework. I find that really helpful. That helps with your feedback lands the first time. So you want to look into describing a situation with specific, describe the behavior observed rather than the motivation. I think the key thing is assuming motivation is a dangerous ground here. You do not know the motivation of someone you can only describe the behavior that was observed, and then describe the impact that the behavior had. I think for tips for leaders here is to provide role play and simulation exercise, especially if someone would like to start giving sort of tough feedback. Having that role play and simulation exercise really helps them to get feedback from you, to at least get the emotion out, to make sure that the feedback can land. And then we'll touch on communication. So you can also start with a framework as well. A communication is often, you also want it to land the first time, making sure that you've got all your information right in front of anyone. You can start thinking about what you want to get out of the communication. So get to the point. Be clear of what the recipient should be receiving to do next, and show that you care as well. Emotion is a very big part of that. I think this is something that I think we struggle a lot in the organization is thoughtful transparency. And so the balance on information sharing. So the balance is that it's not to overwhelm everyone with all the information. The idea that everyone needs to know everything is that you want to create an environment where others can trust that they will have the relevant information so that they can do great work, make informed decisions. And I think that when managers asking me here, surely a highest level of transparency that we can reach as an organization is a good thing. It's actually a trap, because if they are being conducted in plain view, would they be more open and accountable? Being observed can distort behaviors instead of improving it. That's an element of privacy that you need to provide your team into that. So I guess for the sort of tips for leaders and managers would be offer feedback and context to achieve balance. Is the information relevant? Is it a bit of an overkill? Align your words with action. It's a big part of building trust. How have you followed through your action points? Come out of meetings, coming out of retros and things like that. It's not an exercise to, it's not an exercise to feel, if you're not done enough, to feel guilty about. It's really exercising your evaluation. Have you have you followed through often, not often, or have you let things slip through the crack? And if that has been the case, what's your instinct on delegation or asking for help? Because that will exercise your critical thinking on your workload management. And tips for managers is to offer support in this area. I think intrinsically people don't tend to view delegation and asking for help a positive behavior, but it will help your team to take on team members taking more responsibility and you feeling less overwhelmed. If you're burnt out, your team members will suffer. And we're coming on to building trust with managers. Making the most of your one-to-ones. I think the common mistake here that people tend to use one-to-ones as a status report. There are other means, other team meetings that you can offer your status report. And one-to-one is a rare opportunity that you have with your managers to get the most out of your time spent together. Focus on getting context of the work that you're currently doing. It's important to discuss blockers, challenges, and success with your managers. They can give you, a ton more insight and context with your work to help you to get through the next phase of your project. It's also an opportunity to ask what's on their mind. Often managers would have a sort of broader view as to risks and opportunities in the organization. So you can work with them on mitigating risks and innovate. Preparation is key. So often people want to pitch new initiatives, ideas, technology adoption to managers, tech leads. And often, you want to go prepared with all the information they would need to do that. And I also find that 3 is the magic number. If you go in with various options, 3 options to your managers or tech lead, they will often then follow this sort of Goldilocks principle. They will choose the one that is probably the one that you have in mind already. And the manager is on your side. And it's okay to ask for them for their help, and it's okay to talk things out. So I think for leads and manager is to provide the physical and emotional space for holding this sort of honest conversation. Especially if things are not going so well, often people are sort of fear of speaking out. And the kind of mention about physical space, I think in a lot of places that people tend to hold their one-to-ones very near into earshot of other people, that seems to have a real impact on the quality of the one-to-ones, because people want to be able to have the space and the mental space to be vulnerable in that moment. That can build trust between yourself and your managers. And your managers is also on your team. They're human and have a very similar needs as your peer. And we are approaching at the end of our journey. I think to build trust effectively is to be consistent, tenacious, and dependable. It will take time, hard work, and dedication. But it will be worth it because it's a part of being in or building a high-performing team. So I will end on this quote. Trust is earned in the smallest moments, not through heroic deeds or even highly visible action, but through paying attention, listening, genuine care of connection. So this talk wouldn't happen unless for the amazing, immersive Black people. Couldn't ask for better colleagues, really. And that is the end of my talk.